Okay, again, we have the 7 church ages. Okay. Then we have the 7 seals, commencing with the 4 horsemen. Okay. We are removed between the 6th and 7th seal. Then comes the 7 trumpets coming out of the 7th. We looked at this yesterday. This, in some way, replays the story of Joshua and Jericho up to a point. Okay. So we have this, and we have this. Then things go into an absolute frenzy where there's a full-blown satanic attempt at a counterattack that doesn't work while these judgments are coming out. Satan's counterattack will involve these unclean spirits, but also, ultimately, the Battle of Armageddon. Our main purposes, after looking at the rapture and what we looked at last night, is to get more insight into these events, the Antichrist and the rapture. Remember, the book of Revelation is only chronological where it says so. 7 churches, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 vials. Turn with me, please, to chapter 12. This now reverts back to the seals. Chapter 12 takes place during the time of the seals. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. This is very closely approximates what Joseph saw, doesn't it? This woman obviously is identified with Israel because of the vision of Joseph. Let's look very briefly at what Joseph saw. Remember, he's a type of Christ, as we looked at in our first session. But Joseph runs into a problem with his brothers. And his brothers hate him. The reason, of course, his brothers hate him is because of what he saw. Let's look at chapter 37 of the book of Genesis. They say to him, he related to his father in verse 10, to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I, your mother, and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? Verse 9, he said, lo, I had a dream, and still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Joseph is a type of Christ. Okay, Hamashiach ben Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph. Joseph is rejected at first, but then the same brothers come to bow down to him. Jesus is rejected at first, then they come bow down to him. They all acknowledge him. Even the patriarchs will acknowledge Jesus. Before Abraham was, I am. Okay. But then we also see the sign. Again, this term sign is the term that we find in the seals. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear, as Jesus puts it in Matthew 24. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear, and then we see the sign again in Revelation 6. A woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child and cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. We've talked a number of times on a number of tapes how seismology and obstetrics are the two things that most illustrate what it will be like. In seismology, you have a number of minor tremors that occur more frequently before the shift in the tectonic plates and the big one comes. You see this in Japan and in California and so on, New Zealand, where there's an earthquake belt. There's an earthquake belt here in the Aegean. It's a fault line. And things, is this the big one? Oh no, it's just a tremor. But they know eventually the big one is going to come. Birth pangs are the same. Contractions may begin slowly, but then they become more intense and more frequent until the baby is born. Jeremiah develops this. Revelation develops this. It is at least 6 times in the Bible speaking of a woman in travail waiting for a baby to be born, but all of them are a picture of what happens here in Revelation 12. Let's look. Another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. Now it begins to resemble the book of Daniel. Turn, please, back to Daniel. John begins to see what Daniel saw. Chapter 7, please. Verse 7, after this I kept looking up in the night, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, extremely strong. It had iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up between them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. This, of course, points to Antichrist. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. What did we read again in Revelation chapter 6? What happens? The stars fell to the earth. This goes back, in other words, to the rapture. We have the sign, we have the stars going to the earth. And we have what Daniel saw all coming into play at the same time. His tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. Who has heard our tape on Christmas, Hanukkah, and the return of Christ? Only a handful. When Jesus was born, the Magi saw the sign in the sky, the Messiah was coming. Herod the Great, who was as much Roman as he was anything. He was a mongrel Jew, descendant actually of Idumeans. He was only a Jew by the conversion of his family. Ethnic Idumean, Roman by culture and politics and political office. Okay, agent of Rome. He tries to kill Jesus coming out of Mary so he could stay king, doesn't he? He was afraid of another king of the Jews. There was a sign, the king of the Jews is coming. He wants to keep power, so he tries to kill the baby coming out of the woman. Let's read. Jesus is miraculously rescued through the faith of his parents and hidden in Egypt, like Moses was hidden in Egypt through the faith of his parents. We have a tape Jesus a prophet like Moses. There was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels were waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no place found for them in heaven. These are principalities. What becomes politically manifested on the earth is demonic, things that come down from heaven. Daniel and Revelation both directly link the wars on earth with the conflicts in the heavenlies. And the great dragon was thrown down, the spirit of old, who was called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of Messiah have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even unto death. For this reason rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he only has a short time. Very much again what the apostles told us. Knowing his time is short, he looks for someone to devour. And when the dragon saw he was thrown down to earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, and 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times and a half time from the presence of the serpent. That times, time and a half time, 1,260 days, half of 7 lunar years. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. The church is gone. What happens to those who are here? Remember what happened now. This is again Midrash. It replays the Nativity. It is Christmas coming. Herod tries to kill Jesus coming out of the woman Mary so he could stay king. When he fails to do it, he becomes enraged and he makes war with the rest of her offspring. What does he do? He goes to Bethlehem and he kills all the male babies, doesn't he? What Antichrist does is the same thing. The church is going to have dominion, we're told in Daniel. But his dominion will be given to the saints of the Most High. He wants to keep power. So he must try to preempt this rescue. He must try to preempt the rapture and resurrection. But it doesn't work. There is a rapture and a resurrection. So what does he do? He becomes enraged with the woman and the rest of her offspring. He tries to wipe out the church that wasn't raptured, which won't be hard, and he tries to wipe out the Jews. Now, again, it is the dragon was thrown down, that is the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. I emphasize this is speculative. Angelic beings can take human form. They can take human form. When Jesus was born, however, the verse says, "Prepare thou a body for me." The Antichrist will counterfeit the incarnation of Jesus. When Satan is cast down, he comes into Antichrist. Antichrist may have been demonically possessed, but now he is no longer demonically possessed. He is satanically possessed. There's a big difference. The way Jesus is fully human and fully divine, this guy becomes fully human and fully satanic. Now we read the serpent. Notice the connection between the serpent and the term who deceives the whole world. We've pointed out a number of times Satan has two modes of attack, the dragon and the serpent. Woe to those who dwell upon the earth, for the dragon and the serpent are cast down to you. Dragon is Satan the persecutor, serpent is Satan the seducer. The serpent beguiled the woman. You see not only persecution and opposition, but you see internal seduction. The serpent. Now let's look at this. It says, it is bad for those who dwell on the earth and who dwell on the sea. Why? Woe to those who dwell on the earth and the sea. In Ephesians, we are heaven dwellers. We're already by faith seated with Christ in the heavenly places. The reason we are not here, we don't dwell on the earth, is because we're not of it in its present form. We're not of the world. Those whose heart and mind is here, those who love the world, will take the mark of the beast. Only those who don't love the world. That is why in John's epistle, as we explain on the Antichrist tapes, when John talks about Antichrist, he prefaces it by saying, little children, love not the world. Those who love the world will take the mark of the beast. We might say this, those who will take the mark of the beast have taken it already in the attitude of their heart, because their hope ultimately is in this life, in this world. But why the earth and the sea? The earth has to do with Israel. The sea has to do with the nations, like in the Psalms. Why are the nations in an uproar? They gather against the Lord and his anointed, and they're described as a raging sea. Okay. Now you've got two beasts. One comes out of the earth, the other comes out of the sea. What does that suggest? That one of these two beasts will be a Jew in some way, maybe in the way Herod was. Not a real one, but a Jew, officially. And the other of the Gentile nations. There are people who have a problem with this, and I don't blame them for having a problem with this. But you'll go anywhere and you will see, we want the Mashiach now. We want Mashiach now. The Hasidic Jews want Messiah to come. You see this in Antwerp, Belgium. You see it in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. You see it in New York. You see it in London. You see it everywhere. We want Mashiach now. Who do you think they're going to follow? They are not going to follow a Korean or a Venezuelan or an Eskimo. Okay. Jesus said to them, if another comes in my name, him you will believe. The way they believed Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, they will believe Antichrist. They'll in some way trust him as a fellow Jew in some way. That is how he will deceive them. At least one of these beasts. Now let's look. That's the best I can see it. But let's look. Herod goes after Jesus. Doesn't get him. He's snatched away. So he goes after and kills the other babies. Antichrist goes after the raptured church. Doesn't happen. His body is taken away. The body of Christ is removed. So he becomes enraged at the woman, Israel, who give birth to the church. The church comes from Israel. And the rest of her offspring. He goes on a rampage because he has lost again. The first time he lost was the resurrection of Jesus. Now it's happened again. You understand? 3 strikes and you're out, as the Yanks put it. This guy is in trouble. So it's woe to the earth and woe to the sea. The following chapter, and again there's no chapter divisions in the Greek, begins in chapter 13. He stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, same as Daniel. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his head were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne, and great authority. In other words, this political entity. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act was given to him for 42 months. What is 42 months? 1, 2, 6, 0. He opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Notice what the tabernacle of God is. Those who dwell in heaven. And it was to him, given to him, to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, the captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Okay. Now let's understand this. When they begin cloning humans, I don't mean natural clones like twins. I mean manufactured ones, in vitro. Where will the spirits come from? Fair question. Remember, nothing is new. But at some point in gestation, God puts a spirit, howbeit a dead one, into every fetus. Where will these people get their spirit? I'm not saying that is the answer to the problem. I'm simply saying it's a possible answer to the problem, and it is a frightening possibility, isn't it? They're already talking about manufacturing people for certain purposes. Now, what could be more of a slave than somebody manufactured? I don't mean bred. I mean IVF manufactured. I mean even put into a synthetic incubator that can facilitate embryonic growth through computer technology from an early point in gestation. Not possible now. Will it be possible in 10 years from now? I think yes, to some degree. I'm not saying this is it. I'm simply saying it is a possibility. But we are toying with things beyond the bounds God has set. He made them according to their mean, according to their kind. Once you begin transmutating DNA across the genus barrier, you're going beyond the limits God set in the creation. Let's look at this now. Think in terms of creation, new creation, recreation. What book of the Bible deals with new creation? John's Gospel. Who wrote the book of Revelation? John. So the same apostle who writes about the new creation writes about the recreation. Okay? God declares the end from the beginning. Jesus is the Alpha and Omega. We link John's Gospel with Proverbs 8. Genesis and John's Gospel are linked together by Proverbs chapter 8. Okay? So too, Paul's epistles like Thessalonians link new creation with the recreation. These themes become more and more introduced from here on. Alpha and Omega. Genesis, Revelation. In Genesis, we have creation. In Revelation, we have the end of the creation and a recreation. In Genesis, you have Joseph's vision with the sun, moon, stars. Revelation, you have John's vision. Sun, moon, stars. In Genesis, you have a dragon and a serpent. Remember the dragon, the serpent walked, didn't it? But with the curse, now you shall crawl on your belly. It was at least a biped, if not a quadruped. I do not believe dinosaurs are 65 million years old. If you go to the Taronga Zoo in Sydney, Australia, I would invite any Darwinist to climb into the cage with the Komodo dragon. And once that thing takes a chunk out of you, you won't believe they're 65 million years old either. You should see these things. They can get up to 7 foot tall in attacking position. So you have the dragon and the serpent in Genesis. You have the dragon and the serpent in Revelation. Every culture, from China to Mexico, people with no contact with each other, here in the Middle East, they all had dragons, didn't they? They all had dragons. They just became extinct. So in Genesis, the blood of Abel cries out from under the altar, cries out from the earth. The blood cries out. Your brother's blood cries out. Remember in Matthew 23, Jesus calls Abel the first martyr, doesn't he? And so the last martyrs, their blood cries out. When will you avenge us? The blood of the martyrs cries out. Story then continues. In the book of Genesis, you have Babel, the judgment on Babel. In Revelation chapter 17, fallen is false religion, goes back to Babylon. Okay. In Genesis, you have the woman and the seed of the woman. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And so in Revelation, ditto. Okay. It's all there in some way right from the beginning. Think of the Bible like a loaf of bread before it's been cut straight out of a baker's oven. It looks the same on both ends, doesn't it? A loaf of bread, before you cut it up, looks the same on both ends. Okay. You have the language in the creation in Genesis of earth and sea. So in Genesis, you have to have it in Revelation. The earth, the waters. Okay. And then in Genesis, you have a series of climatic, biological, and terrestrial changes. It begins with the fall of man, when longevity is reduced. The biosphere begins to behave differently. And so the same thing happens in Revelation. Ultimately, in the recreation, you will have climatic, biological, and terrestrial changes. I think things that we see now, like global warming and things like this, these are only hints of what is to come. There will be major changes. Only in Genesis, because of sin, longevity was reduced. Bioentropy came as a result of sin. Then it accelerated after the flood. But antediluvian man, before the flood, those people actually did to live to be hundreds of years old. Methuselah, Metushalah, that shall be sent to go. When he comes, it shall go. It's a strange name in Hebrew. He lived nearly 1,000 years old. After these changes take place in Revelation, the same thing will happen. People will actually live to be those ages again. Death was never God's idea. How could you have accommodated all these people? Metabolism was much slower. Today, everything kills us. If you stop breathing, you will die. You will suffocate. However, if you breathe, you will also die. Every breath we take, we are killing ourselves. I pointed this out on the Thanatology tapes. We know when something is being oxidized, something else is being reduced. Every breath you take is a step closer to giving up the ghost. However, if you don't take the breath, you'll give up the ghost even faster. Why should breathing kill us? Well, we have to get more exercise. That is true, but that requires fuel. So for our metabolism to convert the carbon into energy, that requires oxygen. You get exercise, you'll die. You don't get exercise, you'll die. Only question is, which is going to kill you faster? One way or another, we have bioentropy. When something's oxidized, something else is reduced, and there's nobody can do anything about it except God. Fallen man thinks he can, but it won't work. It was not supposed to be like this. But in the millennium, it'll be reversed. We will not have bioentropy. Breathing and eating and exercising won't kill you. Everything we do, even breathing, kills us. We're doomed. It's because of sin. Okay? The first way to understand the book of Revelation is from a literary viewpoint. Think of the loaf of bread straight out of the baker's oven that looks the same on both ends. Genesis and Revelation go together. They have counterparts. The major themes have counterparts, okay? In Genesis, you have God's election of Israel, okay? In Revelation 16, you have God's salvation of Israel. Always going to be the same thing. Now, Satan knows this. So this guy gets ready for action. Let's look again at chapter 13. Verse 11, I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. Notice he tries to look like Jesus, but he has the same character as this political monster. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. Now notice, does this Holy Spirit have the authority of Jesus? Yes. Always a counterfeit. He makes the earth and those who dwell on it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. Somehow, the Antichrist will counterfeit the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He will counterfeit the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There is a suggestion by some that it is at that point when Satan actually enters him and animates him. It may be, I'm not sure yet. And he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. Again, astral phenomena. We warned about that. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the sign which it was given to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him breath. He gave breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small, the great, the rich, the poor, the free men and slaves, he got them again, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides no one should be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Now again, if we're not here, who's going to have wisdom? Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. There is slight confusion in some manuscripts saying 616. Wherever you see something about the Antichrist, there's always confusion. Okay? It takes wisdom to figure this out. In other words, it will not be that obvious at first. By the time it becomes obvious, it is too late. He is the man of lawlessness. I've explained this before. We'll go through it again quickly. Anthropon e nomon. Law is nomos. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 9 that when someone is born again, they go out from under the law of Moses, which teaches about our fallen nature through the example of the Jews, and they come under the law of Christ. It is like driving across a border. If you drive from Scotland to England, say, most of the laws are the same in Scotland as they are in England, but some laws are different. You can't say because you're now in Scotland, there's no more law. It's just a different law. Well, so it is when you come to faith in Jesus. You can't say there's no more law. There are do's and don'ts in the New Testament, the same as there are in the Old. But this is lawlessness. And we're told in 2 Thessalonians that the Lord will send a delusion upon them to make them believe what is false, because they did not love a knowledge of the truth. When you pointed out things to people, that's not biblical. This is not scriptural. We have heard Christians say to us, you're legalistic. I was getting emails last week of a woman who married an evangelist in Israel, and she's his third wife, and she was trying to defend it. Where do people get off doing these things? What they usually will yell at you is you're a legalist, not knowing what legalism is. We all saw this with the laughing drunken thing. This is not scriptural. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not the lack of it. You're a legalist. You have a spirit of legalism. The letter killeth, the Spirit giveth life. That's what they said. Now, we explained what that meant, didn't we, in Thessalonica? We explained what that really meant. It does not mean what they're saying it means. They're too ignorant, most of them, to know what it means. When this gets into the church, you got a problem. We're told in Daniel, he will think to change the times and the law. And they will be given into his hand for 2 times a time and a half time. That arrogant speaking, this is straight out of the book of Daniel, chapter 8. Turn, please, to the book of Daniel. Chapter 8, verse 9, out of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. He wants Israel. Interestingly, not to the west. And it grew up to the hosts of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to earth and trample them down. There it is again, same as Revelation 6, same as Revelation 12. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifices from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply when the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? And he said to me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, and then the holy place will be properly restored. Something goes wrong right from the beginning of the 1,260, and then it continues into the second half, all the way to the very end, till Jesus comes back. It came about when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, that I sought to understand it, and behold, standing there was one who looked like a man, and I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Ulai, and he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man understanding of the vision. Same Gabriel who made the announcement to Mary. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand upright. And he said, behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to an appointed time. He goes on and he talks about the ram's identity. We studied that when we looked at Philip II. It was Media Persia. The goat was Greece. Okay. With this Greece comes Antiochus Epiphanes, as we talked about when we were in Macedonia. He stops the temple sacrifice and puts an image of himself in the temple, actually calling himself Zeus, calling himself God. Okay. And he defiles the temple by slaughtering a pig in it. He goes on doing these things, and the Maccabees oppose him. The story continues through chapter 11, up to verse 36. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and prosper until the indignation is finished, for which is decreed will be done. Up to that point, Antiochus did it. But from verse 36 onward, Antiochus did not do it. Whatever happens beyond verse 36 will be carried out by this beast in Revelation 13. In other words, he will come in the character of Antiochus, somebody who's fully Hellenistic. He will recapitulate what Antiochus did, but then go beyond Antiochus and do the rest of it. You understand what I'm saying? From verse 36 of chapter 11 onward, it has never been fulfilled. Antiochus is merely the shadow. This guy is the substance. Now, so far in chapters 12 and 13, two figures will automatically spring to mind. We've looked at both of them. One is Caesar Augustus. Did you see his statue in Athens in the museum? He was the first emperor deified in his lifetime. What did he do when Jesus was born? He counted the people. He numbered the people to have economic control of the known world. Antichrist will do the same thing. He'll be deified the way Caesar Augustus was deified by the Roman Senate. He will be politically deified by Europe. Now notice they worship the dragon. They worship the system. Somebody was actually accused of blaspheming Europe last year. And yes, in Brussels and on some of their coins, you got a woman riding a beast. Amazing. But they have no idea what they're doing. So the first is Caesar Augustus, somebody who will rule this Roman Empire and be deified. But then you have this religious leader who counterfeits the Holy Spirit, who people think is co-equally fantastic. We have to understand this in light of history, going back not to the Roman Empire, but to the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, being neither holy nor Roman, politically dominated by Germany, but religious purposes dominated by the papacy. Okay? I've warned a number of times. Let's look at Ireland, a Celtic country. Poland, a Slavic country. Italy, a Latin country. Austria, a Germanic country. What is the only thing somebody in Ireland, somebody in Poland, somebody in Italy, and somebody in Austria has in common? It is not language. It is not cuisine. It is not culture. It is not heritage. It is in nomine Patria cum Filio cum Spiritus Sancto. They need this to give power to the beast. Religion is simply a way to arrive at a political end. Once the beast no longer needs the woman, he gets rid of her. She's just a whore. Does a pimp care about a whore? No, she's just a device. Pimp doesn't care about a whore. Now understand how this is going to be. He uses it to get power. Think of Poland before the Iron Curtain came down. Everybody went to Mass. Why? Because they were such devout Catholics? No. Once the Iron Curtain came down and the Soviet Empire collapsed, most people stopped going to Mass except for the old ones. They went to Mass for political reasons. It was an expression of Polish nationalism against the Soviets. It was simply a religious device pursued for political aims among most of the people. Now, Mass attendance, religious vocations, those things have gone way down because they no longer serve a practical political purpose in the lives of most people in Poland. They just want to secularize, especially the educated and the young and the business community. It'll be like that, only on a much, much bigger scale. Already, the Vatican cannot get the mention of God into its constitution of Europe, into the European Constitution. Now, the Brussels bureaucrats have no interest in getting God into the Constitution, but they have an interest in getting religion into the Constitution. You understand? They have a disinterest in God, but a big interest in religion, because it serves a political aim. So the second figure these chapters talk about is Herod. And then, finally, Antiochus. We have three figures now typifying the Antichrist. Antiochus, Herod, and Caesar Augustus, the emperor worship. Bearing in mind the Pope's title, Pontificus Maximus, was also the title of the emperor. The kissing of the ring, the whole bit. But he's ultimately identified by 666. The first person they again tried this with the Roman numerals of his name, using gematria, getting a theological meaning from the numerical value of a word or name, gematria. Matthew uses gematria in Matthew chapter 1 in the genealogy of Jesus. The first one they ever tried it with was Nero. Before we begin worrying about Henry Kissinger's name in Roman numerals and what it adds up to, the thing we should do is look where else does 666 occur in the Bible. Don't look for Kissinger or Javier Solano or any of this stuff until you look where else does it occur in the Bible. Well, it occurs a lot of places in the Bible, in one form or another. Sometimes it is cloaked in the original Hebrew or Aramaic. Other times it comes to 18. 18. Other times it is straight out, 666. But it's all over. From the weight of the armor of Goliath to the dimensions of Nebuchadnezzar's image, it is 666. But we're not looking at simply an image or weight of armor. We're looking for a man. And it's something to do with his name. In the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, when the Jews come back from Babylon, the sons of Adonai Akam are 666. Adonai Akam, my Lord has risen, suggests something. Yet in one account it says 667. Ezra and Nehemiah are off, disagree by one. You always see this confusion. But who else is identified with 666? If you heard the Antichrist tapes, you know there's a very important person in the Bible who seems to be very much what Daniel described. He knows the words of the wise and their riddles. The Hebrew word, hetaim. He knew mysteries. He knew the words of the wise and their riddles. And Daniel tells us the Antichrist will know the words of the wise and their riddles. Turn with me, please, to the book of Kings. First Kings. Chapter 10. We have a woman called Malki Sheva, the queen of Sheba. Now in Luke's gospel, Jesus speaks of the queen of Sheba as a type of the Gentile church, doesn't he? He's always saying, many will come from the east and west and recline with Abraham and the fathers, but you, unbelieving Jews, will be put to outermost darkness. Only the believing Jews won't be. Malki Sheva came to hear the wisdom of Shlomo HaMelech. But I tell you, someone greater than Shlomo HaMelech, greater than Solomon, is here. He answers her questions. His wisdom, his wealth is incredible. He knows the words of the wise and their riddles, as Daniel says. But now let's look. Verse 14, the weight of gold which came to Solomon in 1 year was 666. Turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 9, please. Same story. Malki Sheva comes. He answers her questions. Now the weight of gold which came to Solomon in 1 year was 666. But look at verse 12. Then she turned and went to her own land with her servants, just before Solomon is identified with 666. Okay. Come down. Verse 18. There were 6 steps to the throne and a footstool in gold attached to the throne, and arms on each side, and 2 lions standing next to the arms. And 12 lions were standing there on the 6 steps, on one side and the other. Nothing like it was ever there before. There was never anything like it before. Okay. Add it up. The 6 steps, 6 lions on one side, 6 on the other. But it gets more interesting. Verse 15, Solomon had 600 shekels of beaten gold. Okay. Whenever you have 606 and then another 6, it's always alluding to this. Same as you have wordplay, in Scripture you have number play. Well, it's the same thing in Kings. She goes to her own land with her servants. The suggestion is, and I'm not basing a doctrine on our type, but the church is taken out of here. This guy is identified with 666. But he can suck her in. This guy is going to be good. There is one other character we always talk about, and there are several types of the Antichrist I haven't mentioned. But one of the characters we always talk about is Judas, the son of perdition. Most of you know this for the Antichrist tapes. I'll only touch on it because Revelation does not highlight this aspect much. Does anybody, most of you, who has heard this about Judas on our tapes? Put your hand up if you know what I'm talking about. Oh boy, more than half, well, half do not. Only 2 people in the Bible are called the son of perdition. Only 2 people in the Bible are satanically possessed. Not demon possessed, but Satan possessed. Both of them are into wealth big time. In John's gospel, John's epistle rather, same John who wrote Revelation, when he describes Antichrist, he describes Antichrist in the character of who? They went out from among us, but they're not really of us. Son of perdition, Satan possessed. Went out from among us, not really of us. This, of course, is Judas Iscariot. Now remember Judas. Lord, is it I? Lord, is it I? The apostles did not know who he was until Jesus revealed him. If somebody can't see through a Joyce Meyer or a Benny Hinn or a Kenneth Copeland, they will never see through this. If you can't see through Colin Dye and the Elam movement, if you can't see through obvious heretics and false teachers, they'll never see through this guy. Lord, is it I? Lord, is it I? There are two ways we are told he will seduce people into supporting him, to giving him this kind of political power. One is the miraculous, as it would appear to be. Turn, please, to 2 Timothy. Chapter 3, he talks about the last days. And he says in the last days, the deception in verse 8 will be like Jannes and Jambres who opposed Moses. Pharaoh's magicians. As most of you know, the way that Jannes and Jambres counterfeited the miracles of Moses and Aaron is the way the Antichrist and false prophet are going to counterfeit the miracles of Jesus and his witnesses. The Exodus is a whole big thing about the rapture. That's tonight. He will use signs and wonders. Remember, a wicked and an adulterous generation seeks a sign. These signs follow. When you see Christians chasing signs and wonders, it's the spirit of Antichrist. This is not to negate signs and wonders, Nasim v'nifla oath, but these signs follow. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing the word of God. Jesus had miracles, but he never had a crusade. He had a repentance crusade. You see people chasing a show, they're being set up for it. Satan already has the Jews. He has the earth. He has the sea. He has the Jews and the Gentiles. He's trying to get the believing church composed of both Jew and Gentile. The other way he will do it, however, is the way Judas did it. Let's look. Turn to John, chapter 11. Chapter 12. But Judas in verse 4 said, one of his disciples who were entering to betray him said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now we know he said this with an ulterior motive. He didn't care about the poor. He cared about himself. Okay. Let's look at this synoptically now. Let's look at the synoptics. Let's look at Matthew. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus talks about the religious corruption of the Pharisees. He talks about the corruption of the organized religious establishment. And in it, he makes it clear that these people really don't care about the poor. Everything they do in terms of religious practice, or everything they do with tithing or something like this, especially in verse 25 and so forth, they do these things with a self-serving motive. Religious people have their own agenda, and they will look very humanitarian and religious about doing it. But with Judas, it becomes different. What he warns about in Matthew 23 now gets in among his own disciples. this self-serving motive. Let's look at Mark. The widow's mite in Mark chapter 12 is quite a story. This widow, in verse 43, Jesus said, put in more than all the contributors to the treasury, for they all put in out of their surplus, but she put in out of her poverty. Now this is quite a story and quite an episode. Why? The reason it's quite a story and quite an episode is she was giving for right reasons with right motives. She did not have an ulterior motive by any means. But Judas was quite different. Why was he so concerned about giving alms? We are told he's so concerned about giving alms basically because he wanted to steal it. And the reason he wanted to steal it was not only for his own aggrandizement, but by protesting, this should have been given to the poor. He makes it seem like he's a great humanitarian figure. Now this comes into play again in the Synoptics. Luke 21, Jesus says, this widow has put in more than all of them. They gave out of their surplus. She gave out of what she did not have. But Judas, he's different. He claims to care about the poor. We read that some of the disciples, and then it says the disciples. Only John tells us it was Judas. What does Judas do? He's not like the widow. He makes people think he's a wonderful humanitarian who cares about the poor. He pulls the Mother Teresa routine. How can you say anything bad about Mother Teresa? I'm only quoting Mother Teresa. She said she doesn't give these people the gospel when she got the Nobel Prize. She said she makes them better Hindus and better Muslims. Go to hell, go directly to hell, do not pass go, do not collect $200. If you can't see through her, they'll never see through this guy. He will do the miraculous, what appears to be miraculous, but he'll do it in the power of Satan, as Jannes and Jambres did, him and the other beast, who will work the miracles in his presence. Secondly, he will seem to be such a wonderful, tremendous humanitarian, nobody would be able to imagine him being wicked. There is much more to the social gospel than being social. I've warned about organizations that began as evangelical, like World Vision, like Christian Aid, but are no longer, by biblical definition, Christian. They no longer preach the gospel. They're simply social welfare organizations with a social gospel that have no power of salvation. The attitude God wants is the one of the widow's mite. Now, if you're going to take the widow's mite, you should be willing to live like her. Of course, the money preachers don't. Judas is not featured strongly in Revelation, but he helps us to understand how this beast is going to delude people. They will all wonder after him. Isn't he marvelous? Isn't he fantastic? Now remember, they didn't know who Judas was. Lord, is it I? Lord, is it I? Not until Jesus reveals him at the Last Supper do they know who he is. This corresponds to what we read in Matthew 24. Who is the good and faithful servant who gives the proper food at the proper time? It was during the final feeding that people knew who he was. Not until the final feeding of the church, before the body is given up and betrayed, will we know who this guy is. He's going to be too good. The world will not have a chance to recognize him simply because Christians won't recognize him until Jesus reveals him. Think of Solomon, somebody with that kind of wisdom, somebody like Solomon who built the temple. What did Solomon do? Solomon built the temple. Look at chapter 11, verse 1. There was given to me a measuring rod like a staff. And someone said, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. And leave out the court which is outside the temple. Do not measure it, for it's been given to the nations. They will tread it underfoot, the holy city, for 42 months. It is on the earth now. This is not in heaven. This is the tribulational temple. Solomon is associated with the temple. Yes. Revelation 11:1. Solomon associated with the temple, isn't he? Antiochus Epiphanes, the temple. Herod the Great, that's why they call him the Great, not because he was a great guy. He expanded Zerubbabel's temple to impress the Romans. He took Ezekiel's vision of the millennial temple, combined it with Greco-Roman architecture, built a retaining wall around it, which the Wailing Wall is the western retaining wall, and he made this architectural marvel. Hence they call him Herod the Great. Antiochus, Herod, Solomon, all associated with the temple. Solomon then goes into being a reprobate, into idolatry, doesn't he? Now, the Antichrist to come then diverts from Solomon. Solomon loved women. This guy won't care about that. Yeah. Nonetheless, that's the kind of person we're dealing with. Somebody who is virtually unidentifiable. He looks too good and too positive to too many people, including Christians, including saved Christians, including sincere Christians. Not until we know who he is, not until the faithful church know who this guy is for sure. Paul tells us, Jesus tells us, not until we know who this guy is can we get out of here. The rapture, resurrection cannot possibly take place until this person is identified. There are many antichrists. Many. That's the problem. But these two guys at the end, we're talking about a very, very unique piece of work. Somebody very, very unique. We must be able to tell who this is. Others will eventually know. The Jews will eventually know. But by the time they know, it will be too late. We are not to be caught off guard. We have to know before it is too late. And Jesus will show us.